Picture every woman in the United States in the year 1900. 76 million Americans, and roughly half of them are women. And out of all those millions, the school teachers, the farm wives, the factory girls, the society matrons in their carriages, the brides, the widows, the grandmothers, almost none of them has ever once in her life shaved her legs. Not because razors don't exist. Razors have existed for thousands of years, and there's probably one sitting in her own house right now on the washstand next to her husband's shaving mug. She simply has never thought about it. The idea has never crossed her mind, the way it never crossed her mother's mind, or her grandmother's mind, or the mind of any woman in her family going back further than anyone can count. Now picture the same country in 1964. A survey published that year found that 98% of American women between 15 and 44 were removing the hair from their legs. 98%. That is a higher rate of agreement than Americans have ever managed on almost anything else. More American women shaved their legs in 1964 than voted, went to church, or trusted the government. Somewhere between those two numbers, between almost nobody and almost everybody, something happened. And here's the thing that makes it worth staying up for, or falling asleep to, whichever you're here to do. It wasn't ancient. It wasn't instinct. It wasn't handed down from Rome or Egypt or the mists of anywhere. It happened in one country in about 40 years, within a single human lifetime. A woman born in 1890 could remember the entire thing, start to finish, the way you remember the arrival of the internet. And it did not happen by accident. There are names, there are dates, there are invoices. Somebody convinced them. Several somebodies actually, working 1 inch of skin at a time, starting with the underarm in 1915 and finishing with the leg somewhere around the end of the Second World War. Tonight we're going to follow the whole campaign decade by decade, and by the end you will know exactly who did it, when they did it, what they were selling, and what it cost, including, at one terrible point in the early 1930s, what it cost in human lives, because one of the products in this story turned out to contain rat poison, and that part is not a metaphor. We're going back there tonight. Not as historians squinting at microfilm. We're going to live it. One woman at a time. One decade at a time. The wash water and the wool stockings. The magazine page that started it all. The first razor ever built for a woman's hands. The hemlines. The poison. The war. The pin-up. The pink plastic on the drugstore shelf. One honest thing before we begin. Because this channel keeps its accounts clean. Every advertisement quoted in this story is real. Every product, every price, every date, every company, every poisoning, every survey, real, documented, checkable. But the women whose eyes I'm going to lend you, the farm wife, the magazine reader, the shop girl, the sisters with the eyebrow pencil, they are composites, stitched together from thousands of real women who left almost no records of their own, because nobody thought to ask them. The rooms are real, the years are real, the eyes are borrowed. I'll always tell you which is which. So, I make these history stories, and honestly, I've stopped trying to figure out whether anyone actually sleeps to them, or whether you're all just weirdos who find it soothing to drift off to razor patents and thallium lawsuits. No judgment. Either way, subscribe if you feel like it. Get comfortable. Here we go. The water is grey and it has skin on it. That's the first thing you'd notice if you were her, a farm wife in Indiana, 31 years old, on a Monday morning in October of 1889, wash day. The kettle has been going since before light, and the big zinc tub on the kitchen floor is full of water that was cleaned 2 hours ago, and is now the colour of a rained-on road, with the film of lye soap and wool grease floating on top. Your hands are in it up to the forearms. They've been in it so long the fingertips have gone white and pruned, and the knuckles sting where the lye has found the cracks. You are washing stockings. Wool stockings, black, heavy as wet rope. 6 pairs of yours and your daughter's, and they drink water like they're trying to drown you along with them. You haul each one out, wring it along your forearm with a practiced twist that your mother taught you, and her mother taught her, and the water runs down your elbow and drips off into the tub, and your shoulders have that deep wash day ache in them that won't leave until Wednesday. Here is what you're not thinking about at any point in this long morning. The hair on your legs. You have hair on your legs. Of course you do. Every woman you have ever known has hair on her legs, the same way every woman has eyebrows and elbows and a shadow. You have seen your mother's legs briefly in the lamplight of a shared bedroom, and your sister's legs on summer nights, and your own legs every day of your life, and the hair on them has exactly the same significance to you as the hair on your forearms, which is to say, none at all. It is not beautiful. It is not ugly. It is not anything. There is no word in your daily vocabulary for it, no product in your house for it, no page in any catalogue aimed at it. Asking whether you feel bad about the hair on your legs would be like asking whether you feel bad about the backs of your knees. The question doesn't pass. The shame has not been invented yet. And I need you to sit with that for a second, because everything else in this story grows out of it. This isn't a woman bravely resisting a beauty standard. This is a world where the standard does not exist. Nobody is born ashamed. Somebody has to build the shame, plank by plank, and charge admission. In 1889, the carpenters haven't shown up yet. What you do think about, constantly, is coverage. Because here is the deal your century has made with your body. From the collarbone down, in public, you do not exist. Your dress touches the floor. When you walk, you lift the hem an inch, 1 inch, to keep it out of the mud, and there is an entire etiquette literature devoted to how to do this without revealing anything above the boot. Your boots are buttoned to the calf. Your stockings, those black wool stockings you're wringing out right now, run to mid-thigh and are held by garters, and between the stocking top and your waist there are drawers, and over the drawers a petticoat, and in winter 2 petticoats, and over that the dress. On a hot August Sunday you're wearing more layers below the waist than a modern person wears in a snowstorm. A respectable woman's leg is not called a leg in polite company. It's called a limb. Some especially delicate souls extend the courtesy to chickens and say dark meat at the dinner table rather than name a thigh. You've heard the story, everyone's heard the story, that the finest houses put little skirts on their piano legs to keep even the furniture decent. I'll be straight with you, because this channel doesn't launder legends. That piano story is almost certainly a joke that got away from its teller. It seems to trace back to a British travel writer in the 1830s making fun of American prudishness. And there's no good evidence anyone actually dressed their pianos. But the fact that the joke worked, the fact that people believed it for 100 years, tells you how the era felt about a visible leg. You dress the piano because the word leg itself is already halfway to scandal. At the seashore, you went once to Lake Michigan the summer you were married, women bathe in costumes with sleeves and skirts, and underneath the skirts, stockings. Wool stockings in the water. You came out of that lake carrying maybe 15 pounds of soaked flannel and knit, and you remember thinking it was glorious anyway, because it was the closest thing to bear that public life allowed. So understand, leg hair is invisible not because it's hidden, but because the entire leg is a state secret. You cannot be embarrassed about a thing no one will ever see. The frontier of a woman's public skin in 1889 ends at her chin, her wrists, and the tip of her boot. Hold that map in your head tonight. The whole story you're about to hear is the story of that frontier moving, inch by inch, decade by decade, and of the men who followed it like camp merchants follow an army, selling supplies for territory that had just opened. Now, the face. The face is different, and it's worth pausing on, because the face is where the machinery already exists in miniature. The face is public. It has always been public. And so, for the face and the face alone, there is already such a thing as bad hair on a woman, the dark lip, the joined brow, the stray whisker of middle age. And there's already a genteel term for it, superfluous hair. That phrase is doing a lot of work. Not shameful hair, not ugly hair, superfluous, as if the objection were mere efficiency. Back in 1874, Harper's Bazaar, the great ladies' magazine, spelled B-A-Z-A-R in those days. 1A, remember that spelling, it matters later, collected its beauty columns into a book with the magnificently brutal title The Ugly Girl Papers, or Hints for the Toilet, and it dealt frankly with removing superfluous hair from the face. Decades before that, in the 1840s, a New York operator styling himself, Dr. Felix Gouraud, was already advertising a preparation called poudre subtile, a subtle powder guaranteed to uproot the offending down from a lady's lip and brow. Depilatory pastes and powders like it were sold quietly at druggist counters throughout your century. Sulphur-smelling concoctions, some of them harsh enough to take skin along with hair. So the tools exist. The euphemisms exist. The little engine of facial hair anxiety exists, chugging along in the back pages of the magazines. What does not exist is any reason to point that engine at the 95% of a woman that nobody ever sees. A depilatory man in 1889 who proposed marketing his paste for women's legs would have been laughed out of the trade, not because it was scandalous, but because it was absurd. You'd sooner sell curtains for the inside of a wall. One more thing about your kitchen, before we leave 1889, because two objects in it are going to matter for the next 50 years. Look on the shelf by the door. There's a catalogue there. A thick, cheap-papered mail-order catalogue, the kind that reaches every farmhouse in the country and doubles as reading material, wish book, and eventually outhouse paper. Every product a family needs, hundreds of pages of them. Flip to the pages for women. Corsets, hairpins, tonics, complexion soaps, curling irons. Nothing for removing hair from the woman's body. Now flip to the men's pages. There they are, the straight razors, bone-handled 7/8 inch blades, with strops and mugs and soap. A razor in this catalogue is as male as a plough. Remember this catalogue. We will open it again in 1922, and what we find in it that year will tell us the exact moment the war was won. And the second object, your husband's razor itself, folded on the washstand, the steel smelling faintly of oil and old soap. On Sunday mornings you've watched him work it along his jaw. The scrape of it, a dry gristly whisper, the little wince at the chin. It has honestly never once occurred to you to touch it, any more than it would occur to him to borrow your corset. Objects have sexes in your world. The razor is a man. It will take a corporation, a world war, and the most patient advertising campaign in American history to change that razor's sex. And the men who do it will get rich, and they know exactly what they're doing, and we are going to read their mail. Your daughter is 6. She's under the kitchen table right now, playing with a clothespin doll while you ring the last stocking. Keep your eye on her, because this story is going to move fast now, the way time moves fast when you're working. She'll be 32 years old with a daughter of her own, on the day in 1915 when a magazine page changes the family's skin forever. Her granddaughters will draw stockings onto their bare legs with an eyebrow pencil while real stockings hang in silk, strand threads from parachutes over France. And her great-great-granddaughter, a girl of your own blood, less than a century from this kitchen, will stand in a pink-tiled bathroom and genuinely believe that women have always done this, that it is simply part of being a woman, the way you believe wash day is part of being a woman. None of them will ever be told who started it. You'll know, though. By the end of tonight, you'll know the names. The stocking is wrung. You snap it straight with a crack of wet wool, pin it to the line strung across the kitchen, and it hangs there dripping, black and heavy, shaped like a leg and hiding one. 60 years from now, a stocking will weigh less than a letter and hide nothing at all. That's the whole story, really, hanging right there on your line. But it starts with the armpit. It always starts somewhere strange, and this starts with the armpit, a dance craze, and a magazine ad in May of 1915. Come forward 26 years. The farm is behind us. The daughter who is under the table is 32 now, and you're her. You live in Cleveland, in a rented duplex with a bathroom, an actual bathroom, with a tub and taps, which your mother still mentions every single time she visits, in a tone poised exactly between wonder and accusation. Your husband inspects boilers for an insurance company. You have a daughter of your own, 11 years old, asleep down the hall, and on this particular evening in May of 1915, you're sitting in the good chair by the window with a magazine in your lap, and you're about to become one of the first women in human history to be advertised at about the hair under her arms. The magazine is Harper's Bazaar, the same magazine that published the Ugly Girl papers back in your mother's day, still spelled with the 1A. You don't subscribe, it's a rich woman's book. Your neighbour, Mrs. Hartwell, passes hers along when she's done, a month late and smelling of her cigarettes, and you read it the way people read magazines from a class above their own, half shopping, half anthropology. And there, in the May issue, between the fashion plates, is a picture that stops your thumb. It's a drawing of a young woman in a sleeveless gown. Her arms are raised, curved over her head in a vaguely Grecian attitude, and her armpits, both of them bare, smooth as the inside of a shell, are simply there, on the page, in a respectable magazine, lit like the subject of the portrait, which in fact they are. Beneath the picture, the copy reads, "Summer dress and modern dancing combine to make necessary the removal of objectionable hair." It's an advertisement for a depilatory powder called Exbazen, an old French name that druggists have carried for decades for faces and forearms. But the product isn't the point, and the powder isn't what history will remember. What history will remember is that sentence, because it is a perfect little machine, and I want to take it apart for you the way you'd take apart a pocket watch, because the whole next half-century is built out of copies of this machine. Summer dress and modern dancing, that's the first gear. Blame fashion. The ad does not say we would like to sell you a new anxiety. It says the world has changed, madam, don't shoot the messenger. And here's what makes it slippery. The messenger is not entirely lying. Fashion has changed. Sleeves have been dissolving for a decade, first to elbow length, then to little caps, and now, in evening wear, to nothing at all, to a whisper of net or a bare shoulder, and the dancing is real too. The whole country has gone dance mad in the last 5 years. The tango, the one-step, the foxtrot, ragtime bands in every hotel dining room, and the sleek, beautiful castles, Vernon and Irene, demonstrating in the magazines exactly how a modern couple moves. Irene Castle has cut her hair short, and half the young women in America are thinking about it. And when a woman dances the new dances in the new dresses, her arms go up. What was private skin becomes public skin, one gesture at a time. That's the true half of the ad. Combine to make necessary. That's the second gear, and this one is pure invention. Necessary, not fashionable, not attractive, necessary. As if the hair had become a hygiene problem, a defect, an emergency. Nothing about an armpit changed in 1915. The dress changed, and a powder company reached out and quietly attached a verdict to the reveal. This is the move, the single most important move in the whole story, so let me say it plainly. First, the fashion exposes the skin, then the advertiser tells you the skin is unacceptable as found. Exposure, then verdict. Remember that rhythm. You will hear it again at the knee and again at the thigh, and it is still running today on parts of the body this magazine couldn't print. Objectionable hair, the third gear. Objectionable to whom? This sentence never says. There is no subject in that verdict, no judge to argue with. Just a passive, ambient disapproval, coming from everywhere and nowhere, like weather. Your mother's generation said superfluous, which at least only meant unnecessary. Objectionable means someone somewhere minds, and a woman reading it alone in her chair by the window cannot cross-examine the someone. She can only wonder, for the first time in her life, whether she has been walking around all along with something on her body that people mind. You look at the drawing again. You look, without quite meaning to, toward your own shoulder. That's it. That's the whole transaction. It took 9 seconds. It cost the ex-Bazin company the price of a quarter page, and something that was nothing an hour ago has become a question. It will never go back to being nothing. A question, once installed, only tightens. Nobody is born ashamed, but the installation, it turns out, takes about 1 magazine ad. Now. 2 weeks later, there's a dance at the lodge hall. Your husband's order puts one on every spring, with a hired 4-piece band that plays the new steps a beat too slow. And your sister-in-law Pearl, who is 24 and reads every magazine cover to cover, and already owns a dress with no sleeves worth mentioning, raises her arms in the middle of the foxtrot, and you catch yourself doing something you have never done in your life. Checking. Checking her. Checking yourself. Running a quick inventory of every raised arm in the hall as if you'd been handed a clipboard at the door. The ad is in the room. It's in your eyes now. That's where these things live. Not on the skin, in the gaze. And gazes are contagious in a way skin never is. Pearl, for the record, has read the same ad and gotten there first. Powder from the druggist, mixed to a paste. 5 minutes of a smell like struck matches and rotten eggs. The sulphide stink that every depilatory of this era shares. A smell you will be able to identify blindfolded for the rest of your life once you've met it. Then wiped away, hair and all, leaving the skin pink and faintly indignant. Chemistry, not blades. Because here is a strangeness of 1915 that the ad men are about to fix. Even now, even with the verdict published, a woman does not shave. Shaving is what men do. The razor still has a sex. A woman dissolves, plucks, powders, anything but that gristly masculine scrape. The word shave cannot yet be printed next to a woman's picture, and won't be in the big magazines for years. Which brings us to Boston, and to a man with a moustache like a bank president and the single most profitable idea in the history of skin. His name is King Camp Gillette. King was his given name, not a title. His parents simply aimed high. And his story is already a legend in the trade by 1915. A travelling salesman of bottle stoppers, he'd been advised by his boss, the man who invented the throwaway bottle cap, to find a product people use, discard, and buy again. In 1895, mid-shave, glaring at a dull straight razor that needed an expensive stropping, he had it. A razor whose blade was so cheap you'd toss it and buy another. Forever. A patent followed in 1901. Production in 1903. And in that entire first year, the company sold precisely 51 razors and 168 blades. That is not a typo. 51 customers. The next year, tens of thousands. Within a decade, millions. The blade that dies is the customer who never does. By 1915, the Gillette Safety Razor Company of Boston has conquered approximately half of the male faces worth conquering. And somewhere in its offices, the oldest question in business gets asked, who else can we sell this to? And the answer is sitting right there in the May magazines, arms raised, freshly ashamed. So in 1915, the very same year as that ex-Bazin page, Gillette introduces the first razor ever designed, built and marketed specifically for women. They call it the Milady Décolletée. Landmark objects deserve their measurements. So here is this one, our first. A safety razor of the company's standard hoe-type pattern, but daintier. Gold-plated, its little curved handle sized for a smaller hand, packed in a leatherette case lined with velvet, satin cradled like a bracelet, at the considerable price of $5. Call it more than a week's wages for a shop girl. And that packaging is the strategy, stated in brass and velvet. This object must not look like a tool, because tools are male. It must look like jewellery. It is sold in jewellery stores and department stores, suggested as a gift, a thing for the vanity table rather than the washstand. Same steel, same geometry as a man's razor. Different sex, installed at the factory. And the advertising for it is a masterclass in not saying the word. The Milady Décolletée is offered as the safest and most sanitary method of acquiring a smooth underarm. Smooth, sanitary, dainty, well-groomed. The copy talks of necessity and immaculateness, of the demands of the sleeveless gown and the dance. What it does not say, anywhere, is shave. A woman does not shave. A woman achieves smoothness. The verb has been surgically removed and buried at a crossroads. Even the anatomy gets renamed on the way past. The ads say underarm, a word with no history and no smell, because armpit, the word every human being actually uses, is judged too coarse to print beside a lady. New skin territory, new map, new names. Conquerors always rename the streets. Keep that velvet-lined case in your mind's eye, by the way. $5, gold plate, satin. One of these is going to turn up again in this family. Twice, actually. Decades apart. The second time in a place and a year that would make King Camp Gillette's moustache stand on end. History keeps its receipts. Does it work? Not overnight, and it's worth being honest about the pace, because the legend compresses it. The Milady Décolletée sells respectably, not explosively. What matters more is the drumbeat that follows it. From this 1915 season on, the underarm campaign never stops. Ad after ad, magazine after magazine, summer after summer, the trade will look back on the next 4 years, 1915 to 1919, as one continuous assault, and a scholar we'll meet properly later in this story, one who sat down and counted every single hair removal ad in the great ladies' magazines across the decades, will mark this as the first wave. Underarms first, underarms only, hammered until the question is settled. By the end of it, among the young and fashionable of the cities, the smooth underarm is not a novelty anymore. It is drifting toward what these campaigns always aim at, the point where the product stops being a choice and becomes the default, where a woman no longer remembers deciding. And then the war helps. The war always helps in this story. Keep count, there will be two. In 1917, the United States goes over to France, and the army wants its 4 million men clean-shaven. Partly discipline, partly because a gas mask must seal tight against a bare jaw, and in this war the seal of a gas mask is not a grooming question. It is the difference between a man who comes home and a man who does not. In 1918, the government places an order with Gillette for 3.5 million razors and 32 million blades. One company, one contract. And every doughboy learns to shave himself daily with the safety razor he keeps. When those men flood home in 1919, the daily self-shave is a national male habit. The safety razor is as ordinary as a toothbrush, and there is one in nearly every bathroom in America, sitting right there on the shelf, where a wife or a daughter, reading the magazine's escalating opinions about smoothness, can reach it. The armpit fell in about 4 years if you date it from that May page in 1915. One ad to plant the question, one gold-plated razor to answer it, 4 summers of drumbeat, and a world war to put the hardware within arm's reach. When the trade journals write about it later, and they will, with the unembarrassed frankness of men talking shop, they won't describe it as a change in feminine feeling. They'll describe it as a campaign. Their word, a territory identified, softened up, taken and held. You, in the chair by the window in Cleveland, you hold out longer than Pearl. You're a farm girl underneath. Your mother wrung wool in a zinc tub and you know in your bones what things cost. But your daughter is 11. She's growing up inside the drumbeat, and to her the question will never even feel like a question. And late one August night in 1919, with the house asleep and the bathroom door bolted, you stand at the sink with your husband's Gillette. His, not yours. The family will not own a lady's razor for years yet. And you raise one arm, and in 6 careful strokes you resign from the 19th century. The scrape is quieter than you expected. That's what you'll remember about it. Not shame, not thrill. Just a small, dry whisper of steel. The smell of his shaving soap on your own skin. Faintly wrong, like wearing his coat. You rinse the razor with more care than you have ever rinsed anything. Dry it, and set it back at its exact angle, because this, whatever it was, is nobody's business. Half a war and a magazine page. That's what it took to move the frontier from the wrist to the shoulder. The leg is going to take longer. The leg is going to take everything the 20th century has. A stock boom, a hemline revolution, a poison scandal with a body count, a second and far bigger war, and a chemical invented in a Delaware laboratory that will briefly be more precious than steel. But the men in the trade papers already know where they're going next. The line is moving down. Follow the hemline knows the way. Before we follow it, though, I want to take you inside the machine itself, because advertisers convinced them is easy to say and hard to picture, and this channel doesn't deal in fog. Let's go to New York, to a floor of offices off Madison Avenue in 1919, and let's put you at a desk in the corner of it. You're 20 years old, a stenographer at an advertising agency, hired because you type 90 words a minute, and, though nobody said it aloud at the interview, because the agency's clients sell things to women, and the men upstairs have begun to suspect that it might be useful to keep a few actual women within consulting distance. You are, as far as you can tell, the only person on the floor who's ever bought a jar of anything the agency advertises with her own money. The office smells of pipe tobacco, mucilage and hot metal from the radiators, with a bright chemical thread of ink coming off the proof sheets that messengers carry through twice a day. Your desk is an oak slab by the window, your machine is an Underwood with a worn E, and your job, hour after hour, is to type the copy, the drafts and redrafts of the small essays that will run beside drawings of beautiful, worried women in next season's magazines. You learn the house rules fast because they're pinned up, literally, in the copy department. Lists of words. Words that sell to women and words that frighten them. On the good list, smooth, dainty, immaculate, sweet, fresh, fastidious, well-groomed, modern, necessary. On the bad list, for any product touching a woman's body, shave, razor blade held too close to the text, armpit, and any word that names the body too plainly. You type the smooth underarms so many times in your first year that your fingers learn it as a single chord. You never once type, a woman should shave her armpits, though that is the entire and only meaning of everything you type. The men who write this stuff are not mostly monsters. That's important, and it's more unsettling than monsters would be. They're young, jokey, ambitious. They wear good suits with cigarette burns. They argue about copy the way other men argue about baseball. And they read their own trade press, Printer's Ink, the industry's weekly Bible, where the strategy of the age gets discussed in the open, with the shameless clarity of men who assume no housewife will ever read a word of it. And the strategy, stated plainly in 100 variations across those years, is this. The great fortunes are no longer in telling people what a product does. They are in telling people what they lack. You do not sell soap, you sell fear of being unpresentable. You do not sell a razor, you sell the suspicion that somewhere, someone noticed. The trade has a phrase for the approach, scare copy, and the practitioners debate it exactly as calmly as engineers debating a bridge load. Does fear pull better than pride this season? Should the headline humiliate or aspire? 50-50 split tests in the Sunday editions will tell. And in 1919, the year you start, the whole floor is talking about the armhole lad. Not one of yours, rival agencies, Jay. Walter Thompson, but genius is studied wherever it strikes. Here's the documented story, and it's worth a minute because it is the master pattern for everything that happens to legs later. There was a young woman in Cincinnati named Edna Murphy, a surgeon's daughter who'd been trying since before the war to sell a liquid antiperspirant her father had devised for his sweating hands in the operating room. She called it Odorono, and for years it barely moved because women were insulted by it. Perspiration was simply not a thing one discussed. Druggists wouldn't display it. Her first ads got her letters from women informing her the product was unnecessary and the subject indecent. Then she hired the Thompson Agency, and a copywriter there named James Webb Young was handed the account, and in the summer of 1919 the Ladies' Home Journal ran the result. A painting of a lovely couple mid-embrace, and the headline, "Within the Curve of a Woman's Arm," and beneath it a quietly lethal essay subtitled "A Frank Discussion of a Subject Too Often Avoided." The text's masterstroke was a single idea. You may be guilty of this and no one will ever tell you. Your friends know. The man knows. They are all too polite to say it. You will simply be gradually, mysteriously, avoided. Around 200 readers of the Ladies' Home Journal were outraged enough to cancel their subscriptions over that page. A number of women reportedly stopped speaking to the people responsible, and Odorono's sales within a year rose by more than 100% and kept rising year over year until the once unsellable bottle was a fixture of the American dressing table. 200 cancellations against 100% gain. Every copy chief in New York did that arithmetic before breakfast, and the conclusion entered the industry's bloodstream permanently. The ad that offends 100 women while planting one unanswerable doubt in a million is not a failed ad. It is the best ad. Embarrassment scales. That is the machinery, and once it exists, it is completely indifferent to which inch of the body it's pointed at. Sweat today, breath tomorrow. 5 years from now, the Listerine people will take an obscure clinical term, halitosis, and ride the same unanswerable doubt to one of the great fortunes of the decade, teaching America that its breath, too, had been silently offending. Hair on the body slots into the pattern like a key into a lock, and it's even better than sweat because hair is visible. Hair photographs. Hair can be drawn in before greys and after whites in every magazine in the country. So through 1920, 1921, 1922, you sit at your Underwood and type the doubt over and over in its dainty vocabulary. The accounts change: a depilatory house, a razor client, a maker of dress shields losing ground to the smoothness it once concealed. But the essay is always the same essay. Fashion has changed, madam. Eyes are upon you. Others have already complied. How long can you afford to be the last? Nothing is ever commanded. Commands can be refused. What the copy sells is surveillance, the feeling of being permanently, politely watched. And you cannot argue with a feeling, especially one printed beside a drawing of a woman more graceful than you, caught mid-gesture in the dress you cannot quite afford. You type it and you take your paycheck, and here is the part you'll remember when you're old. It works on you too. You typed the words yourself. You watched two men in shirt sleeves argue for an hour about whether objectionable pulled better than unsightly. You know, in the fullest way a person can know, that the emergency is manufactured, that it came out of this room, off that Underwood, past your own fingers, and still, at the shore at Far Rockaway in July of 1921, in the new bathing costume with its scandalous bare calf, you find yourself checking. The doubt does not care that you built it. That's the terrible elegance of the thing. The trap works on the trapper. It is the most democratic product America has ever manufactured. And how do we know the campaign was winning, actually winning out there in the country, beyond Manhattan and the magazine class? Here's how, and long-time listeners will recognize the witness, because we've called on it before. In 1922, the great mail-order catalogue, the same fat wish book that sat on the shelf of that Indiana farm kitchen in 1889, the one that in your grandmother's day offered razors to men as unremarkably as it offered ploughs, and offered women nothing for hair at all. In 1922, Sears, Roebuck begins listing razors and depilatories for women. Sit with that, because it's the quiet thunderclap of this whole decade. Sears does not gamble, and Sears does not preach. Sears is arithmetic in a binding. Its buyers put a product on those cheap grey pages for one reason only, because orders will come back from everywhere, from towns with one street, from farms at the end of rutted roads, from households that have never seen a copy of Harper's Bazaar and never will. When the smooth underarm reaches the Sears catalogue, The campaign is no longer a metropolitan fashion. It has soaked all the way down through the country like water through sand. 7 years, armpit to farmhouse. The first gun we planted in the 1889 kitchen has fired. One more thing about the machinery before we move on, because fairness is part of accuracy. The ad men did not invent the bare arm. They did not raise a single hemline. Paris and the war economy and the young women themselves did that for their own reasons, and plenty of those reasons were good ones. Lightness, movement, modernity, the sheer joyful shedding of your mother's 15 pounds of wool. The adman's genius was never exposure. It was the verdict attached to exposure, the follow car of the fashion parade moving down the body one season behind the dressmakers, stamping unacceptable as found on each new inch as it came into the light. Fashion opened the territory, advertising taxed it, and no inch, once taxed, has ever been returned. By 1923 you've left the agency, married a pressman, moved to Queens, and on your last day, one of the copywriters, the older one with the burned-out eyes who was kind to you in an absent sort of way, tells you the thing you'll repeat for 50 years. Not a confession exactly. Shop wisdom. The product, he says, was never the razor. Any machine shop can make a razor. The product is the doubt. The razor is just what she buys to make the doubt stop itching for a day or two. Best product ever invented, doubt. Wears out overnight. Restocks itself. He wasn't wrong, and you knew it, and you shook his hand anyway, because it was 1923 and the world was loud and bright and nobody had time to be right about things. Down in the street the crowds were pouring toward the subway in the last light, and you stood on the corner a moment and watched them, and you could see it. Actually see it. The thing the whole floor upstairs lived on. The hemlines. In 1919 they had hovered at the ankle. Now they were at the calf and visibly climbing, season over season, like a tide line on a piling. Silk stockings, sheer ones, flesh-coloured ones, not your mother's black wool, flashing by the 100 in the electric light of the shop windows. Every one of those stockings was an inch of newly public skin. And somewhere above you, in 100 offices exactly like the one you'd just quit, the follow car was already shifting into gear. The leg was next. Everyone in the trade knew the leg was next. The only question was which year the tide would clear the knee, and the answer, as it turned out, was 1926, which happens to be the year a shop girl in Chicago walked into a drugstore on a Thursday evening, and, in a voice she'd practiced on the streetcar so it would come out flat and bored, asked for a packet of blades. Let's go meet her. She's your granddaughter, farm wife. She has your chin. Chicago. A Thursday evening in June of 1926, and the heat coming up off State Street has that stockyard and gasoline flavour that Chicago summers are famous for, and you are 22 years old, standing behind the hosiery counter of a great department store, wearing white cotton inspection gloves and holding, stretched between your two hands, a stocking so sheer it barely exists. This is your job. 8 hours a day, 6 days a week, $14 a week. You sell women's stockings. And I need you to understand what a stocking has become in 1926, because your great-grandmother would not recognize the object in your hands as belonging to the same species as the black wool ropes she wrung out in a zinc tub. This thing weighs less than a letter. It is silk, or, for the girls who can't run to silk, the new artificial silk, which the industry 2 years ago voted to rechristen rayon, because artificial was poisoning the sales floor. It is not black. It is the colour of skin, sunburn, nude, beige, a whole poetry of flesh tones, because the entire point of the modern stocking is to make the leg look bare while technically keeping it dressed. It is a diplomatic instrument, this stocking. It negotiates on millions of legs at once, the treaty between what fashion now displays and what respectability can still pretend is covered. And fashion in 1926 displays the knee. This is the year the hemline completes the climb it began after the war. Ankle in 1919, calf by 23, and now, this season and next, the shortest skirts in the history of the modern world, hovering right at the kneecap, and every etiquette authority in the country wringing its hands, and every girl on State Street entirely deaf to them. Your grandmother lifted her hem 1 inch above the mud, and there was a literature about how to do it decently. You take the streetcar in a skirt that ends at the knee, and between the hem and the shoe there is nothing but 18 inches of silk-coloured silk pretending to be your skin. Which brings us to the shadow. Because here's what the sheer stocking does that nobody planned. Under a flesh-coloured film of silk, in the right light, the hair on a leg shows. Not dramatically. A faint darkness, a shading under the sheen, like something seen through ice. Your great-grandmother's leg hair was a state secret inside black wool. Your leg hair is a silhouette in a lighted window, and you know the exact moment you learn to see it, which is the whole tragedy of this chapter in one scene. It was a customer last summer, a woman perhaps 40, trying the new gunmetal shears at your counter, stretching her leg out toward the light, and your floor supervisor afterward in the stockroom mentioning it. The shadow. In the voice. You know the voice by now, your whole generation is being raised by it. The voice of polite ambient verdict. 1 remark, 90 seconds, and you had it forever after. The checking eye. You had caught it at last. The disease the magazines has been coughing toward you since you were a child. From that afternoon on, you could see the shadow on every leg that crossed your counter, and in the fitting room mirror on your own. The magazines, of course, got there ahead of you. They always do. All through these middle 20s, the hair removal advertisements, which spent 1915 to 1919 hammering the underarm and consider that front one and garrisoned, have been reaching tentatively further down the page. Not a flood yet. Be accurate, the flood comes later. But steadily now, among the underarm ads, come mentions of limbs, of the well-groomed leg, of smoothness for the sheer stocking. A depilatory cream called Neat is on every drugstore shelf. An evil-smelling wax called Zip, sold by a New York operator who styles herself Madame Berthet, with the slogan "It's off because it's out," promises to rip the problem up by the roots, and advertises in the best magazines. Ex-Bazin soldiers on. The scholar I promised you, the one who counted, hold on, she's coming, she's worth the wait, will find that in these years the ad's declared territory expands in print from the underarm to the arm and leg, even as most ordinary women outside the fashionable core are still only tending the underarm. Print always claims the ground first. Print is the artillery. The infantry, the actual habits of actual women, follows at a distance of 5 to 15 years. But it follows. It always follows. That's the horrible, reliable physics this whole story runs on. You hold out through the spring, it's not rebellion, it's $14 a week. Silk stockings cost up to $2 a pair and run if you look at them with intent. You own 4 pairs, rotate them like a general husbanding reserves, mend runs on your lunch hour with a hooked needle, and you're not adding a $5 gold-plated toilet article to your budget to solve a shadow. And then in June, 2 things happen in 1 week. First, the store announces that the summer uniform for counter girls in the fashion sections will be the new shorter length. The store must embody what the store sells, says the memo, which was written by a man whose legs the store will never once discuss in a memo. And suddenly, the shadow is no longer your business alone. It stands, also the checking eye insists, between you and the floor supervisor's report, and behind her report, the wage, and behind the wage, the rent. Understand this about the trap, because it's the part the trade papers never printed. By 1926, the doubt has been laundered into employment. Nobody orders you. Nobody has to. The verdict has soaked into supervisors and floor walkers and the hiring offices of banks and telephone exchanges, into the whole apparatus that decides which girls look right, and a girl who cannot afford to look wrong will do the advertiser's work for them and call it her own free choice. The most efficient tax is the one collected by the taxed. Second, your Aunt Pearl comes to town. Pearl, the sister-in-law from the lodge dance, remember her? The one who got there first. She's 35 now, widowed young, brash and lacquered and doing well in the millinery line in Cleveland. And she blows through Chicago twice a year on buying trips and takes you to dinner and tells you everything wrong with your wardrobe with a frankness you'd take from no one else. And she is, as it happens, the only person on earth you'd have told about the memo. She listens, she laughs, not at you, at the century, and then she opens her travelling case and takes out a small worn leatherette box and puts it on the tablecloth between the coffee cups. Inside, on velvet gone bald at the corners, gold plate rubbed to brass at the grip, a Milady décolleté. The Milady décolleté, bought new for $5 in 1916 in the first proud wave, the little curved handle size for a hand like yours, 10 years old, and it has crossed from jewellery to heirloom without ever quite being either. Pearl's kept blades in it all along. Take it, she says. And then she says the thing you'll still be quoting when you're 80. The first genuinely honest sentence anyone has ever said to you on this entire subject. It's a nuisance and a racket, she says, and the men who invented it are laughing in Boston. But it's the price of the ticket now, kid. Pay it in the bathroom and don't pay it another thought all day. Don't you dare let them charge you twice. Once off your wrist and once off your mind. The price of the ticket. Your whole century in 5 words. So, Thursday evening. The drugstore at your corner, tile floor, ceiling fans stirring the smell of malt and camphor and soda fountain vanilla, and you at the counter in your practice streetcar voice, flat as a timetable. A packet of blades, please. As though you'd bought them 100 times. As though your heart weren't going like a hall clock with the weights pulled. The clerk, 19 and pimpled, hands them over with supreme indifference and rings the register. He has sold 6 packets today to women older and calmer than you. You are a rear guard, not a pioneer. Somehow that's the most deflating and the most comforting thing about the whole transaction. And that night, in the bathroom down the hall of your boarding house, with the door hooked and the gas ring hissing under the water pot, you sit on the edge of the tub with your skirt pinned up and Pearl's gold razor loaded, and you do the thing, soap lather going cool on your shin. The first stroke upward. Wrong, you'll learn. Everyone learns. Dragging, catching, a sting at the ankle bone where the skin is thin as paper, a bright thread of blood you staunch with the licked finger, cursing in a whisper because the walls are thin. The second stroke better. By the 6th, a rhythm, the little golden hoe hissing through the lather, laying bare a strip of leg that gleams in the gaslight like something newly manufactured, which in every sense that matters to this story, it is. 20 minutes, 2 nicks, 1 bath towel with regrettable rust-coloured evidence you'll rinse before the landlady sees. You hold your leg up to the light, smooth as the inside of a shell, the shadow gone from the window. And you feel... Pearl was right about the racket and right about the ticket, and here is the thing this story has to be honest about. Even so, you feel wonderful. That's the checkmate. And there's no sense pretending otherwise, because the trap was never built out of misery. The stocking slides on over the new leg like water. In the fitting room mirror on Friday, the checking eye sweeps you and finds nothing to report. And the silence of that eye, the sudden, blessed silence of the eye you didn't ask to be installed, feels like health, like Sunday, like being 22 with good legs in the loudest city in America. The product delivers. The doubt stops itching, exactly as advertised, for a day or two. And then the stubble comes in like a Monday, and you buy more blades, and King Camp Gillette's dream of 1895, the blade that dies so the customer never does, is now collecting from both sexes forever. You'll shave twice a week from this night until the week you die, and you will never once in all those years be able to point to the moment you chose it. That's not an accident. That was the design spec. One more small purchase from this decade, and watch it carefully, because it goes in the pocket of history and comes out 17 years later at the strangest possible moment. In 1927 you start wearing eye makeup. Everyone does now. The movies did it. Clara Bow's eyes are the national weather. And among the little tools on your dresser is a slim lacquered cylinder, an eyebrow pencil, soft black wax, sharpened with a razor blade naturally. The racket feeds its own. You use it on your brows and think nothing of it. Put it in the drawer. Leave it there. In 1943, a girl of your blood is going to take an eyebrow pencil exactly like it, kneel on a bathroom floor in a defence plant town, and draw a stocking seam up the back of her sister's bare-shaved leg, dead straight, ankle to hem, while the real stockings ride in Bombays and parachute packs over 2 oceans. The pencil doesn't know yet. Nobody knows yet. Because right now it's still 1927, 1928, and the music is loud and the market is climbing like the hemlines, and the checking eye has been bribed into silence, and the whole bright racket looks like it will run forever. It has 23 months. In October of 1929 the market goes off a cliff, and the lights of the 20s go down all across the country, and you'd think, wouldn't you, that with a quarter of the country out of work, the small vanity of a smooth leg would be the first thing history repossessed. You'd think shame about body hair was a luxury good. It wasn't. It turned out to be depression-proof. The cheapest ticket to respectability left for sale. A dime of blades or a jar of cream standing in for the wardrobe nobody could afford. And into that desperate bargain-hunting market in 1930 walked a product with a beautiful name, a society clientele, a $10 price tag, and an ingredient that belonged in a rat cellar. This is the part of the story with a body count. Stay with me. We'll go carefully, and I'll tell you exactly what's documented because every word of it is. First, understand the landscape of 1930, because it explains why the trap worked. By 1930 the underarm is settled law, and the leg campaign is gathering real weight. The depression perversely feed in it, because a smooth leg in a mended stocking reads as cared for, employable, respectable, and respectability is the only currency whose printing press the crash didn't smash. But a great many women still will not put a razor to their legs, and their reasons are a perfect little museum of everything the last 30 years built. Some still feel the old sex of the object. The razor remains faintly male, faintly fast, and nearly all of them believe the thing everyone's mother now says, the great folk doctrine of the 20th century bathroom, that shaving makes the hair grow back thicker, darker, bristlier, that the blade breeds against you. It isn't true, for the record. The science on this is old and boringly unanimous. A hair cut off at the skin grows back exactly as it was, merely blunt-tipped, stubbly to the thumb, and the stubble feels coarser, and so the legend feels confirmed. But true or not, it moved product, because it made shaving feel like a debt. Miss one payment and the interest compounds on your own shins. So there is a fat, frightened market for anything that is not a razor. The cream that dissolves, neat, exbasan, delatone, reeking of sulphur, cheap and nasty and honest about it. The wax that rips, Madame Berthier's zip, it's off because it's out. The pumice mitt that sands the hair away and a layer of you with it. And hovering above them all, the grail every one of these products gestures at and none delivers. Permanence, kill the root, pay once, be smooth forever, and never think about it again. Any product that could truthfully promise that would own the century. In 1930 in New York, a product appeared that promised exactly that. It was a cream, thick and bland and faintly perfumed, in a handsome jar. It was not sold from push carts. It was sold across the counters of some of the best department stores in America and advertised in respectable magazines at $10 a jar. $10 in 1930, when a man lucky enough to have a factory job might clear $25 a week. The price was part of the promise. Cheap creams burned the hair off for a week. This one, said the advertising, worked differently, worked slowly, scientifically at the root itself, so that over weeks the hair simply gave up and stopped coming. Harmless, said the copy, to the most delicate skin. It was called Koremlu. Pretty name. Sounds vaguely French, vaguely scientific, vaguely like a flower. It was none of those things. It was the name of its maker, a New York beauty parlor operator named Cora M. Lublin, Cora M. Lublin Koremlu, and I give you her full name deliberately, because this story has spent 4 chapters on nameless machinery, and here, at last, the machinery has a face, and Koremlu worked. That's the horror of it. For a while, it visibly, gloriously worked, better than anything on the market. The hair thinned, the hair stopped. Women wrote grateful letters. Because the cream's active ingredient, at a concentration of roughly 7%, was a salt called thallium acetate. Let me be precise here, because I promised precision, and this is the exact place in the story where precision matters most. And let me note carefully what thallium is. Thallium is a heavy metal, a neighbour of lead and mercury on the periodic table, and its salts are among the classic poisons of the 20th century. Its principal commercial use in 1930 was killing rats. It has one weird, well-documented side effect on the way to killing you. It makes hair fall out. Medicine knew this, knew it so well that through the 1920s, thallium had been used deliberately, in measured hospital doses, to defoliate children's scalps before treating ringworm, and had racked up its own grim ledger of poisoned children in the process, in cases doctors were publishing with increasing alarm. That is the property Koremlu bottled. The cream didn't coax the root to sleep. It was slow poisoning the customer, and hair loss was simply the first symptom to arrive. The one symptom in the poison's repertoire that a depilatory company could sell as success. But thallium absorbed through the skin does not stay in the skin, and it does not distinguish between the hair you're aiming at and the rest of you. Week by week, jar by jar, faithful customers rubbed it in, on lips, on chins, on arms, on legs, month after month, because permanence takes patience, the copy said so. And the letters that began reaching doctors and then the American Medical Association changed key. First, the hair on my head is coming out in handfuls, in patches, eyebrows and all, because the poison was now everywhere in them, and it defoliates everything. Then, pains in my feet and legs, burning, stabbing pains, the signature peripheral neuritis of heavy metal poisoning, nerves dying from the fingertips inward. Then, in the worst cases, I cannot walk. Legs that no longer answered, eyes going wrong. Women who had bought smoothness at $10 a jar, lying in hospital beds learning the word thallium from a resident with a textbook. Through 1931 and into 1932, the AMA's journal took Koremlu apart in print. Analyses, case reports, warnings issued in the driest possible clinical prose and all the more damning for it. Case after documented case. The young woman poisoned by months of use on her upper lip and chin, the women with the dropped feet and the vanished eyebrows, the inventory of ruined nerves. The record is unambiguous about the crippling. Women left in pain for years, some with permanent damage, walking out of this story on canes it sold them. Whether Koremlu killed outright is a harder line to draw at this distance. Deaths were laid at its door at the time, and thallium in other hands that same decade, the ringworm clinics, the rat pastes that found their way into families, certainly killed. But it is the crippling, the dozens upon dozens of wrecked and half-wrecked women, that stands documented beyond any dispute. I'll always tell you which is which. That's the honest shape of it. Now here is the part that should keep you up, except that this is a sleep channel, so let's say, here's the part to file away calmly and remember in the voting booth. When the medical journals caught Koremlu in 1931, the federal government of the United States could do precisely nothing about it. And I mean that literally as a matter of statute. The Food and Drug Law then in force was the Pure Food and Drugs Act of 1906, a quarter-century old, written in the era of patent medicines, and it covered food and it covered drugs, and a cosmetic was neither. A cream sold to beautify, even a cream that was 7% rat poison, fell into a perfect legal silence. The Food and Drug Administration's own people knew it and hated it. They took to assembling a travelling exhibit of the horrors they were powerless to touch. The poisoned creams, the caustic beauty treatments, an eyelash dye called Lash Lure that in 1933 would blind women, documented, photographed, one of the most famous injury cases in American regulatory history. And a journalist christened the exhibit the American Chamber of Horrors. Koremlu hung in it, as a warning. Warnings were all the law allowed. What finally stopped Cora Lublin was not the government. It was the oldest, slowest, most expensive remedy in the book. The customers sued her. Civil suits piled up through 1931. The claims eventually totaled around $2.5 million, an enormous sum against a cream company. And in 1932, the Koremlu Cream Company collapsed into bankruptcy, and the jars came off the counters, and that was that. No prison, no verdict of poisoning. A business failure, on paper indistinguishable from 1,000 honest ones that same terrible year. The women with the dead nerves got at most pennies from the wreckage. You cannot garnish a bankruptcy for your ability to walk. If you want the one image to keep from this chapter, take this one. A composite, I remind you, built from the case reports, borrowed eyes over documented facts. A woman in Brooklyn, 1931, 34 years old, sitting at her kitchen table in February with the jar in front of her. Handsome jar. She kept it displayed on the dresser at first, the way you display a $10 purchase in a $2 year. She has a scarf on her head because of what's under it, and her feet, in wool socks and slippers on the linoleum, are burning. That deep, wrong electrical burning the doctor couldn't explain until last week, when he asked, almost in passing, whether she used any preparations. And she's reading the label again, the way you reread a letter that's already ruined you, harmless to the most delicate skin. She bought it for her shins, for the shadow under the stockings, for the checking eye, for a husband hanging on to half shifts, and a world where looking cared for was the last asset the family had that couldn't be foreclosed. She did everything the Sentry asked. She paid the ticket, and the ticket was poison, and no law of the United States had stood between her and it, and the company that fed it to her will die this coming year. Not for what it did to her nerves, but for what her lawsuit did to its ledgers. The doubt was manufactured. She paid for the cure. The cure was rat poison. Somewhere in that triangle is everything this story has to teach, and none of it is on the label. It took 6 more years and more horrors, Lashler's blinded customers among them, and finally a patent medicine called elixir sulfanilamide that killed more than 100 people, many of them children, in the autumn of 1937, before Congress moved. In June of 1938, the Federal Food, Drug and Cosmetic Act became law, and for the first time in American history, the word cosmetic stood inside the fence of federal safety law. Too late for the Koremlu women. Laws are gravestones more often than shields. But from 1938 on, the racket at least had to sell its doubt without selling thallium alongside it. Progress in this story always arrives exactly one disaster after it was needed, and 1938 has one more entry in its ledger, and this is the pivot of the whole night. So mark it. That same year, in the last week of October, at a preview of the coming World's Fair in New York, a vice president of the DuPont company named Charles Stein stepped up to a lectern in front of 4,000 women's club members and announced that his chemists in Delaware, a team led by a brilliant, doomed young chemist named Wallace Carruthers, who had taken his own life the year before and never saw the announcement, had invented an entirely new fibre, the first fully man-made fibre in the history of the world, spun from, as the company liked to say, coal, air and water, strong as steel by weight, fine as a spider's thread. They called it nylon, and Stein, knowing his audience precisely, announced it not as a marvel of chemistry, but in the one form guaranteed to make the front pages: stockings. Stockings that would not run, would not bag, would outwear silk. 4,000 women applauded a test tube. Within 4 years, that fibre would be pulled off every leg in America and sewn into parachutes. And the empty space it left behind would finish, finally, totally, permanently, the 40-year campaign this story has been tracking. The leg was about to go bare in public, coast to coast, for the first time since the Republic was founded. And a bare leg, unlike a stockinged one, keeps no secrets at all. The stockings themselves arrived like a national holiday, because that is literally what the company made of it. After a teasing limited release in Wilmington, DuPont put nylon stockings on sale across the country on one coordinated day, May 15th, 1940, a date the newspapers took to calling Nylon Day, and American women bought out store after store before lunch. Lines around the block, counters stripped, rationing signs handwritten by overwhelmed floor managers. 2 pairs to a customer, please. In the first year, something like 64 million pairs. 64 million in a country of about 130 million people. There are not 64 million adult women in America in 1940. The average customer is buying in multiples, hoarding the future on her own legs. And notice what the nylon stocking is. In the terms our story cares about, it is the sheer stocking perfected. Cheaper than silk, sheerer than silk, tough enough to survive the streetcar. Which means the shadow problem, the 1926 problem, is now every woman's problem at $3 less. The leg shaving campaign, grinding forward through the 30s, gets handed a national amplifier. By 1940, the magazine ads have long since dropped their coyness about limbs. The word shave itself, unprintable next to a woman in 1915, remember, buried at a crossroads, has been creeping back into respectable copy because the euphemism war ends the way all wars of pretense end. Once everyone is doing the thing, the word stops burning. The frontier has reached mid-thigh and dug in. One more push and the campaign is complete. The push came on a Sunday morning in December of 1941 from the Imperial Japanese Navy, which was not thinking about legs at all. You know the date. Everyone knows the date. Here's the part of December 7th nobody puts in the newsreels. Nylon and silk were war material from the first hour. Silk was already gone. The supply came from Japan of all places, and the embargo of 1941 had strangled it months before the bombs. And nylon, the miracle that had existed as a consumer product for exactly 19 months, turned out to be precisely what you make parachutes from. Parachutes, glider tow ropes, aircraft cord, mosquito netting for the Pacific. In early 1942, DuPont converted its entire nylon production to the war, and the last stockings evaporated from the shelves into hoards and black markets. And for the next 3.5 years, the standard price of a black market pair would hover around $5 minimum when you could find one at all, which mostly you could not. Do the arithmetic of what just happened, because it is the hinge of the entire night. Hemlines are at the knee, and rising slightly, because cloth itself is rationed now. The government literally regulating the yardage in a skirt. Bare legs below the hem are, for the first time in American history, not a choice, but a fact of national supply. 60-odd million pairs of legs, accustomed for 2 decades to the diplomatic cover of sheer stockings, are now out in daylight with no treaty at all. Exposure, total, involuntary, coast to coast. And you know by now, because I've made you memorize it, what always follows exposure. The verdict was already waiting. 25 years of it. So here's where I take you for the last full vignette of the night, and it's the one this whole story has been braiding toward. A war town in Michigan, August 1943. One of those overnight boom towns around a bomber plant, all raw pine housing blocks and mud streets and round-the-clock shift whistles. Borrowed eyes over documented fact, same as always. You're 20. Your sister is 23. She's the one with the job at the plant, riveter's assistant on the wing line, swing shift. And you clean and keep house for 4 boarders and stand in the ration lines. And between the 2 of you, you are precisely the women the war posters are painted of. Minus the airbrushing plus the smell. Because that's the first thing to say about 1943 that the posters leave out. The smell. Hot metal and cutting oil in your sister's hair when she comes off shift, so deep no soap fully lifts it, cabbage and shared bathwater in the housing block, everything rationed, everything grey with reuse. Tonight there's dance. USO at the Armory, big band. Half the plant is going, and your sister has one good dress and no stockings. Nobody has stockings. That sentence has stopped being a complaint and become a condition of the universe, like winter. But an occasion is an occasion, and the folk engineering of the ration years has produced a solution, and the solution has a name in every magazine and every drugstore in America. Leg makeup, liquid stockings, bottled stockings. The cosmetics houses, locked out of so much else by shortages, have swung their whole machinery behind it. Elizabeth Arden sells a Velva leg film. Max Factor, the Hollywood makeup house, sells leg paint perfected on movie sets. There are creams and lotions and cakes in graded stocking shades, and the women's pages run tutorials, and the department stores hold demonstrations with models propping their calves on velvet stools in the aisle. You own a bottle, beige rose, half gone, hoarded like sugar. Applied right, in even strokes with a damp sponge knee to ankle, it dries to a matte film that at 6 feet in evening light passes completely. The leg looks stockinged. Applied wrong, it streaks like a painted fence and comes off on hems and sofas and notoriously on the trouser legs of dance partners. But before the paint, and this is the point, this is why we're here, comes the razor. Because paint is honest in a way silk never was. A film of tinted lotion hides nothing. It lies flat and announces every hair beneath it like grass under a flooded field. The magazines say so outright now in plain words. No euphemism left standing, shave first. Smooth is the foundation coat. And so, on this August evening, in the shared bathroom at the end of the hall, 4 families, 1 tub, a window painted half over for the dim out, the full liturgy of 1943 assembles. The saved sliver of soap, the basin of water heated on the ring, and the razor. And I want you to look at the razor because you've seen it before. Steel is war material too. New razors are scarce as everything else is scarce, and the family razor situation was solved back in 42 when your aunt, seeing you both off to Michigan, pressed into your case a small worn leatherette box with velvet gone bald at the corners and gold plate rubbed to brass at the grip. Pearl's razor, your aunt's own razor. She's the Chicago shop girl of 1926. She has told you the boarding house story, the licked finger, the flat voice on the streetcar, until you can recite it. A Mlady décolleté, bought new for $5 in 1916 as a piece of boudoir jewellery for dismantling the shame of a foxtrot, now 27 years old, loaded with a hoarded wartime blade, doing service in a bomber plant boarding house between shift whistles, if King Camp Gillette's moustache could see it. The little golden hoe has outlived its velvet century and been drafted. Your sister sits on the tub edge with her foot on the basin rim and shaves, with the unromantic speed of a woman who has done this twice a week since she was 16. For her there was never a before. That's your grandmother's generation story. And the old razor hisses through the soap, and the shift whistle across the mud goes off for the swing change, and nobody in this bathroom is thinking about 1915, which is exactly how you know 1915 won. Then the paint, sponged on in the last daylight by the window. Then the pencil, because a 1943 leg paint job has one finishing stroke, and it's the one the whole era will be remembered by. Real stockings have seams. A seam up the back of the leg is the signature of a stocking, the thing that says silk even when silk is a memory. And so the tutorials teach it, and every woman in America knows it. You draw the seam on with an eyebrow pencil. Soft black wax, the same slim lacquered cylinder that has ridden in dresser drawers since Clara Bow, sharpened tonight with the same razor blade naturally. The racket feeds its own, even in wartime, and drawing a seam is a two-woman job. So your sister stands on a kitchen chair, holding her hem, facing the wall, and you kneel on the board floor behind her with the pencil, and you set the point at the ankle bone, at the top of the heel where a seam is born, and you draw upward, slow, breath held, wrist locked, one unbroken line up the swell of the painted calf, behind the knee where the skin creases and the pencil skips, and you smooth the skip with a fingertip, up the back of the thigh to the hem, dead straight. It has to be dead straight. A wavering seam is worse than none. Everyone says so. There are girls at the plant who check each other's seams at the clock line the way soldiers check buttons. Your sister holds the chair back and looks at the painted-over window and hums the song the radio has been playing all month. And outside, the whistle-change traffic slops through the mud, and 4,000 miles east of this bathroom, this exact evening, actual nylon, last year's stockings, this year's canopies, is settling out of the night sky over burning Europe with young men swinging beneath it. One leg, then the other. 2 lines, maybe 90 seconds each, and you sit back on your heels and squint, and they're good, they're straight. And your sister steps down off the chair and turns her calves to the mirror, first one side, then the other, exactly the gesture her great-great-grandmother used checking a wrung stocking against the light in an Indiana kitchen in 1889. The eyebrow pencil bought in 1927 has fired its shot. 54 years of this story balanced on its point, a drawn line up a bare shaved leg, imitating a stocking that has gone to war. No image in the whole century says it cleaner. The leg is now expected to be smooth, even when pretending to be dressed. The stocking, black wool to silk to nylon to a pencil line, has thinned away to pure symbol, and what remains beneath it, mandatory now, is the manufactured leg, shaved, painted, seamed, inspected. The campaign that started at an armpit in a May magazine has reached the skin's last public inch, and it got there riding a world war that did the exposing for free, while the advertisers, 25 years deep in verdicts, collected. She goes to the dance. You know she does. She jitterbugs with a corporal from Tennessee, and the seams hold, and the paint only slightly ruins his trousers, and this is a sleep story. So let's leave them there under the armory bunting in the good part of a hard year. 2 footnotes to the war, and then the fighting in this story is over. First, pinned inside half the lockers at your sister's plant and taped to half the bulkheads of the Pacific Fleet, there's a photograph. A blonde in a white bathing suit and heels, back to the camera, smiling over her right shoulder. Betty Grable, shot at 20th Century Fox in 1943 by a studio photographer named Frank Powolny. The most reproduced pin-up of the war, millions of copies, the most famous legs of the 20th century. The studio, never shy, had those legs insured with Lloyd's of London for $1 million. A publicity stunt, let's be clear, flagged as such. The premium was the press coverage. But the stunt tells you the score better than any survey. In 1889, an American leg was a limb, unnameable in company. In 1943, an American leg is a national asset with a valuation, a morale weapon, government adjacent. And every inch of it, you will notice, is smooth. The smooth leg is now simply what leg means. The pin-up is the verdict with a smile on it, and it hangs where the sons of the Koremlu jurors can see it every night. Second, the war ends. August 1945, and among the 10,000 promises of peacetime, DuPont's is specific: nylons by Christmas. The reconversion stumbles, supply trickles, and through late 1945 and all of 1946 the country is treated to the spectacle the papers gleefully christen the nylon riots. Tens of thousands of women in lines outside department stores. In Pittsburgh in June of 1946, a documented 40,000 people queuing for 13,000 pairs. Scuffles, torn coats, broken windows here and there, mounted police at a hosiery counter. Historians will use those lines as a symbol of pent-up consumer hunger, and fine they were. But look closer at what the hunger was for. Not for covering the leg again. The bare summer leg survives the peace. The treaty is never fully restored. The hunger was for the perfected leg. The sheer film that shows the smoothness and forgives nothing. The women in the Pittsburgh line were not queuing to hide their legs. They were queuing to frame them. The frontier had nowhere left to go. 40 years, armpit to ankle, and the map was complete. All that remained was for the conquered territory to be normalized, paved, schooled, suburbanized, handed to the next generation as if it had always been there. That part took about a decade. It happened in a pink bathroom, and it is the quietest chapter of the night, which is convenient because you're getting sleepy and the loud parts of this story are done now. Truly done. From here to the end, it's all soft water and porcelain and the sound of a household settling. It's a Tuesday evening in April of 1959 in a subdivision outside Detroit, one of those instant neighborhoods of little brick ranches with saplings staked in the yards. Every house 8 years old, every mortgage 30. You're the younger sister from the boarding house, the one who knelt on the board floor with the eyebrow pencil. You're 36 now. You married a tool and die man after the war. The corporal from Tennessee wrote to your sister for 2 years and then married a girl from Memphis. And your sister, for the record, married a plant foreman and lives 11 minutes away and still has forearms that could rivet. You have a house with 2 bathrooms. 2. Your mother mentions it the way her mother once mentioned bathtubs, and the smaller one is tiled pink. Because in 1959 everything is pink. The tile, the towels, the Kleenex, the kitchen ranges in the magazine ads, the whole exhaling pastel country. And on this Tuesday evening your daughter, who is 13, comes and stands in the kitchen doorway with her arms folded, and that particular court-swallowing look 13 keeps in stock, and says the sentence you have been expecting on some back shelf of your mind for years. Mom, can I start shaving my legs? Everybody does. Everybody does. Hold the sentence up to the light a second because it's the trophy on the whole campaign's mantle. In 1889 the idea did not exist. In 1915 it was an advertisement. In 1926 it was a nervous purchase in a practiced voice. In 1943 it was a war measure. And by 1959, in the mouth of a 13-year-old in a pink-tiled suburb, it is simply weather. Everybody does. A fact about the world, like school on Monday. No revolution is truly finished until the children believe it's nature. This one finished sometime between the nylon riots and tonight. She isn't wrong either. That's the thing. You know exactly where she got the timetable, because you've seen the magazine on her bed. 17, which has existed only since 1944, a magazine invented for an age group that wasn't a market until the ad men subdivided it, and which carries, among the circle pin sweaters and the going steady advice, razor advertising aimed with actuarial precision at girls precisely her age. Your first shave, the copy purrs. There are starter razors now, lighter heads, pastel handles, pink naturally, and gift sets for teens, and gentle instructional columns about legs and daintiness in that new voice the 50 has perfected. The older sister voice, sweet as a malted, with the verdict tucked inside like the pit in a cherry. The trade found the last untapped acreage in America, and it turned out to be 14-year-old shins. Frontiers closed everywhere else. It only ever moves in one direction, younger. And the gym locker room did the enforcement for free, the way the shop floor did it for your grandmother in 1926. Everybody does isn't marketing to your daughter. It's a field report. 2 girls remarked on another girl's legs at volleyball in October. She's told you about it twice. At that oblique angle children use for the things that actually frighten them. And that was that. The checking eye doesn't need magazines anymore. It's fully installed, self-replicating, running on 13-year-olds. The advertisers built it, but it's been public infrastructure for years now, like the roads. So you say what mothers say. We'll see. Ask your father. Oh, for heaven's sake, don't cry. All right, Saturday. And on Saturday, the 2 of you drive to the Rexall, and the drugstore aisle tells you in one glance how completely the war your grandmother's generation fought has been won and paved over. A whole section now. Razors in carded pastel plastic. Aerosol shave foams, brand new this decade, that hiss out a handful of warm-smelling cloud. Pink electric shavers. Every appliance house makes a ladies' model now, and has since Remington led with one back in 1940. That buzz like fat bees, and let a girl do her calves at her vanity, dry, between phonograph records. Not one syllable of shame anywhere on the packaging because none is needed. The shame finished construction years ago and holds itself up now, load-bearing, invisible. The copy is all sunshine, smooth, pretty, confident, sure. The vocabulary of a verdict so total it can afford to smile. You buy her the pink razor and a can of the foam, 69 cents and change, and she carries the bag to the car herself, formally, like documents. And that evening in the pink bathroom you teach her, the full liturgy, handed down. Warm water first. It softens the hair. Foam, not bar soap. We're rich enough now. Long light strokes up the calf, no pressing. The razor does the work, you just drive. Careful at the ankle bone, careful at the knee. The knee has corners. You'll find the hard way once and never again. She nicks the ankle bone anyway. Everyone does. Once? It's practically a sacrament by now. Your grandmother did it in a Chicago boarding house with a licked finger and a whispered word she'd have denied knowing. And your daughter hisses, and you hand her the styptic pencil and show her how. And she holds her leg up to the pink light and turns it. First one side, then the other. The gesture, the family gesture. 5 generations old and nobody in the room knows it's an heirloom. She's happy. Lord, she's happy. She wears the Band-Aid to school like a campaign ribbon. And you stand there in the doorway with the towel, happy that she's happy. And underneath, in the place where you keep the things there's no kitchen language for, something older is ticking. Because you remember the boarding house and your mother's stories of Pearl and the jar your grandmother would never have in the house. She'd read about the Koremlu women in the papers and never forgot. And you know, in the vague documentary way one knows family things, that this Saturday evening sacrament your daughter thinks is as old as womanhood is younger than the house across the street's rose bushes. You are one of the last people alive who ever saw the before. Your daughter will never believe there was a before. When she's grown, If you tell her that her great-great-great-grandmother lived and died and was loved and buried without once thinking about the hair on her legs, she will look at you exactly the way she'd look at you if you said the woman had never once thought about brushing her teeth. That's not ignorance. That's what total victory looks like, one generation on. It looks like nothing. It looks like a pink bathroom and a 69-cent razor, and everybody does. In the top drawer of your dresser, under the handkerchiefs, there's still the little leatherette box, velvet balled at the corners, gold worn to brass. You haven't loaded it in years. Blades for it are getting hard to find. You keep it the way people keep a grandfather's service medal, proof of a war the neighbourhood has forgotten was ever fought. 5 years after that Saturday, this was 1964, comes the number this whole night opened with, so let's close the ledger properly. A survey of American women that year found 98% of those between 15 and 44 removing the hair from their legs. 98. In one lifetime, inside the single lifetime of the farm wife's daughter, who was born in 1883 and, yes, is still alive in 1964, 81 years old in a nursing home in Cleveland, a woman who read the objectionable hair ad the month it was printed and outlived the entire campaign it launched. The number went from a rounding error to a rounding error's complement. Statisticians almost never get to watch a behaviour go from nobody to everybody inside one subject's lifespan. This one did, and we know its dates the way we know a war's. Which leaves only the question you actually came for, the one in the title. It's had 40 years of evidence laid down tonight, and you're warm, and the house is quiet, so let's gather it all up gently. Every name, every date, and say it plainly, once before sleep. First, meet the witness I've owed you since 1915, the one who counted. In 1982, a scholar named Christine Hope published a study with the flatly wonderful title, Caucasian Female Body Hair and American Culture, and what she had done was the thing nobody had bothered to do in all the decades of everybody assuming leg shaving was simply eternal. She went into the archives and read the advertising, the great women's magazines, Harper's Bazaar and McCall's among them, issue by issue from before the First World War to the end of the Second, and she counted. Every hair removal ad, what part of the body it named, what words it used, what it dared, and when. And out of the counting came the shape you've been living inside all night. Nothing. And then, in May of 1915, the first shot. Then 4 years of concentrated fire against the underarm. She called it, with a historian's dry smile, the Great Underarm Campaign, an assault, and the trade's own language backs her up. Then the slow, tentative extension down the limb through the 20s and 30s as the hemlines and the sheer stockings open the ground. And then the war, the bare-legged 40s, when the leg fell for good. It is one of the quiet triumphs of scholarship that study, proof, laid out in column inches, that a thing the whole culture experienced as instinct has a paper trail. The shame has a date stamp. You can hold the microfilm up to the light and watch the shame being typeset. So, who convinced them? Here is the answer, assembled. Every part of it something you've already held tonight. It was not the ancients. Yes, some Egyptian and Roman women removed body hair, and some women in various times and places always have, but there is no unbroken custom, no torch handed down. The American women of 1889 stand as witness that the line, if it ever ran, was utterly dead in the country that concerns us. It was not the church. The church, if anything, preferred the wool stocking. It was not the doctors. No medical body ever prescribed it. The only physicians in this story are the ones cataloguing thallium cripplings. It was not the government. The government's contributions were accidental. One gas mask contract, one parachute requisition. And its single deliberate act in 1938 was to make the shame market stop poisoning people. And it was not, whatever the folk versions say, any decree of men in general. The husbands and corporals of this story mostly never noticed the campaign at all, which was part of what made it unanswerable. It was first and namely the ex-Bazin depilatory house and its unnamed copywriters who in May of 1915 in Harper's Bazaar printed the sentence that attached the first verdict to the first newly bared inch. Summer dress and modern dancing combined to make necessary the removal of objectionable hair. It was King Camp Gillette's company of Boston, which in that same season built the first razor in history for a woman's hand. The gold-plated Milady décolleté, $5 in its velvet case, and with it quietly changed the sex of the razor. It was the euphemism engineers who made the campaign speakable, smooth, dainty, underarm, immaculate, never shave, until the habit was universal enough that the word could come home from exile. It was Edna Murphy and the copywriter James Webb Young, whose 1919 Odorono page, Within the Curve of a Woman's Arm, proved with arithmetic 200 cancelled subscriptions against a doubling of sales, that the ad which politely humiliates 1 million women is the best ad money can buy. And it was the whole trade behind printer's ink which took that proof and made scare copy a load-bearing doctrine of American selling. It was Sears, Roebuck, whose 1922 catalogue carried the verdict down every rutted road in the Republic. It was the depilatory houses, Neat, Bazin, Delatone, Madame Berthier's Zip, that industrialized the alternative for every woman the razor still frightened. And it was, in the campaign's one unforgivable chapter, Cora M. Lublin, whose Koremlu cream sold rat poison as permanents at $10 a jar from 1930 until the lawsuits, roughly $2.5 million of them, broke her company in 1932 after the medical journals had filled with women whose feet burned and whose hair fell and whose legs failed, in a country whose law did not yet contain the word cosmetic. And it was, second, the forces no boardroom commanded but every boardroom rode, the hemline, which rose from the mud of 1889 to the knee of 1926 for women's own reasons. Lightness, movement, freedom, the shedding of 15 pounds of wool, and which opened inch by inch the territory the advertisers taxed. The sheer stocking, silk, then rayon, then DuPont's nylon, that made the leg public while pretending to dress it, and the 2 world wars, the first, which put a Gillette in 4 million kit bags and a safety razor on every bathroom shelf in America, the second, which took every stocking in the country for parachutes in 1942 and marched 60 million legs into daylight bare, where 25 years of accumulated verdict was waiting for them with leg paint, an eyebrow pencil, and a smiling pin-up whose insured legs told every woman in the checkout line what a leg was now for. Exposure, then verdict. Fashion and war did the exposing, the sellers of doubt did the verdicts. Neither could have done it alone. Together they didn't miss once in 40 years. That's the who. That's the whole answer. No ancient custom. A campaign. Not a conspiracy in a cellar. A market, working in the open, in signed advertisements with dates on them. 1 inch of skin at a time, from a magazine page in May of 1915 to a pink bathroom in 1959. It has names, and you know them now. And if some night someone tells you it was always this way, that it's simply part of being a woman, you may smile into the dark because you have read the invoices. What became of them all? The real ones, the documented ones? This channel settles its accounts. King Camp Gillette, the utopian dreamer who armed both sexes with the everlasting blade, lost most of his fortune in the crash and died in 1932, the same year Koremlu died its very different death. Of Koremlu herself after the bankruptcy, the record goes quiet, and I won't invent what it doesn't say. Edna Murphy sold Odorono to a larger firm in 1929 and stepped out of the story a wealthy woman. James Webb Young became one of the most honoured ad men of his century and wrote a famous little book about how ideas are made, which, after tonight, you may read with a certain expression. Wallace Carruthers never saw a nylon stocking sold. Betty Grable's photograph outlived the fleet it sailed with. She died in 1973, and the picture is still in print. Christine Hope's counting is still on the library shelf, waiting, as it waited for us tonight, for anyone who wants to check. And the women whose eyes you borrowed, the farm wife at her zinc tub, the reader in the chair by the window, the stenographer at the worn Underwood, the shop girl with the flat streetcar voice, the sisters in the boarding house bathroom, the mother in the pink doorway. They were never any one woman, so history has no dates for them. They were millions, and whoever each of them was, the century closed gently over her, the way water closes, and what she felt at her own mirror went unrecorded, which is exactly why we had to borrow the eyes at all. And now it's late, and the story is nearly all the way told. Nearly, because a fair accounting owes you one last short chapter, the one that runs from 1964 to the bathroom down the hall from where you're lying right now. It's a quiet chapter. It can be told at a murmur, which at this hour is exactly what we want. Because here's what happened after the number reached 98. Nothing. That's the ending the campaign always dreamed of. Nothing, forever, on schedule, self-renewing. The doubt had become infrastructure, and infrastructure doesn't need advertising the way a campaign does. It only needs maintenance. The ads kept running, of course. The razor houses and the cream houses would no more stop advertising than a city would stop patching roads. But their job had changed. They weren't planting the question anymore. They were selling the answer in new colours. More blades, more comfort strips, more pastel handles, a new moisturising something every second spring. The registers, it may not surprise you to learn, kept their old habits too. Decades later, when consumer researchers got around to comparing prices in the drugstore aisle, they kept finding that the pink version of a razor cost more than the identical men's version beside it. Nobody had to decide that in a boardroom by then. The machine had learned it by itself back when it was being built and machines remember. There was one real challenge, and honesty requires it in the record. In the late 1960s and the 1970s, for the first time in half a century, some American women asked the question out loud, actually out loud, in print, in the new feminist magazines and the consciousness-raising circles. Who decided this? Why am I paying this tax? Some stopped paying it, publicly, deliberately, and the culture reacted with a fury that told you everything about how deep the verdict had sunk. Because by then, an unshaved leg on an American woman wasn't read as neutral, the way it had been read on every woman in the country in 1889. It was read as a statement, a flag, a provocation. Think about what that means. The campaign had achieved the deepest thing a campaign can achieve. It had made the natural state of the human body politically illegible. There was no way back to nothing. A woman in 1889 with hair on her legs was simply a woman. A woman in 1975 with hair on her legs was making a point, whether she wanted to be or not. The advertisers had not only taxed the territory, they had salted it, so that even refusal grew in their shape, and the numbers barely moved. When the scholars went back out with their surveys in the decades that followed, the 80s, the 90s, they kept finding the same thing. Better than 9 in 10 American women, still removing the hair from their legs, generation after generation, long after anyone alive could remember the world before. The 70s challenge settled into a permanent honourable minority, and the habit rolled on, and the follow car, remember the follow car, moving down the body one season behind the dressmakers, the follow car never parked. It simply moved to newer territory, the way it always had. The bikini line in the 60s and 70s as swimsuits shrank, and after that, well, you live now. You know where the frontier went next, and you know the vocabulary it hired when it got there, because it's the same vocabulary. Smooth, clean, necessary, exposure, then verdict. The machine your great-grandmother's watched being built is still running tonight, on schedule, in high definition. The only difference is that now you know the sound it makes. You could pick it out of a lineup. That was the point of tonight. So let the story set its exhibits down now, one by one, the way a museum closes, lights going off room by room. The zinc tub first. Indiana, 1889. Grey water with skin on it. 6 pairs of black wool stockings heavy as wet rope. Let it stand there in the dark of its farm kitchen, honestly earned, honestly emptied. The catalogue on the shelf beside it. Razors for the men, nothing for the women. Arithmetic in a binding, waiting 33 years to change its mind. The magazine page. May 1915, 1A in Bazaar, the raised arms, the 3-gear sentence, some address, and modern dancing. The most consequential quarter page in the history of American skin. Let it yellow in its archive box. The little leatherette case, velvet balled at the corners, gold worn to brass, 1916 jewellery, 1926 inheritance, 1943 war material, 1957 keepsake under the handkerchiefs. $5 once, priceless twice. The handsome jar, harmless to the most delicate skin, that was never harmless to anything. Let it stand in its chamber of horrors, label out so the next century can read it. The eyebrow pencil, worn to a stub on the backs of 2 good legs in a bomber plant boarding house, its one line dead straight, ankle to hem. A single nylon stocking, 1940 shearer's breath, 64 million sisters strong, half of them still in their wrappers in bureau drawers when the fleet sailed, and gone to canopies by 42. And last, the pink razor, 69 cents, carded plastic, riding home from the Rexall in a paper bag held like documents, the air of all of it, the whole century marked down for Saturday. That's the estate. That's everything the campaign ever actually was, laid out on 8 small pedestals. A tub, a catalogue, a page, a razor, a jar, a pencil, a stocking, a razor again. Everything else, the necessity, the objection, the verdict, the everybody does, was never an object at all. You could never put it in a case. It lived in the gaze, and the gaze is closing now, yours is, which is the whole idea at this hour. Let it close. Because here's where the whole long campaign finally comes to rest. In a bathroom, at night, maybe yours tonight an hour ago. Warm water in the pipes, a towel over the rail, and somewhere on the porcelain, in a cup or on a ledge, standing among the toothbrushes as if it had been there since the world began. A razor. Pink, maybe. Plastic. Direct descendant of a gold-plated $5 answer to a question nobody had asked until a powder company asked it in May of 1915. It looks eternal. Nothing in the house looks more eternal. You know better now, and knowing better costs nothing at this hour. It changes nothing about tomorrow, requires nothing of you tonight. Whatever you do with your own skin, every woman in this story would tell you the same thing, from the farm wife to Pearl to the girl with the Band-Aid ribbon, is your own business, and the only real mistake is letting them charge you twice, once off your wrist and once off your mind. Pay whatever ticket you choose to pay, or none, but keep your mind. The mind was always what they were really after. The house is quiet now. Whatever your day cost, it's been paid and the register is closed. And if the story needs a final image before the formulas of sleep, let it be this one, because it's the truest thing the whole night owns. Every woman you walked beside tonight had an hour like this one. This exact hour. The farm wife had it. 1889. The stockings dripping on the line, the fire banked, the children breathing in the loft, her wrecked hands finally still on the quilt, and no thought in her head about any inch of her body, because no one had built the thought yet. She had this hour, and it was clean. Her daughter had it. Cleveland, the magazine closed on the floor beside the good chair, the question newly installed and itching, but the lamp off now, and the itch she noticed could not follow her past the dark. She had this hour. The ad had the day. The day was all it ever got. The stenographer had it. Queens. Decades of typed verdicts behind her. The pressman snoring gently. The whole doubt factory 8 miles and a world away, and her last thought most nights not of copy, but of the sea at Far Rockaway, which had never once checked anything. She had this hour. The shop girl had it. The boarding house, the gas ring cold, Pearl's razor dried and boxed, the streetcars thinning out toward midnight, her leg under the blanket, just a leg again, off duty, off display, hers. She had this hour twice a week with stubble, and the rest of the week without, and the hour never once asked which. The sisters had it. Swing shift permitting, the paint washed off in the shared tub, the seams gone down the drain, the armory band still faintly in the younger one's ears, the older one asleep in 30 seconds flat the way plant workers sleep, and 4,000 miles of dark ocean between their bare, clean legs, and every parachute in Europe they had this hour. The mother in the pink doorway had it, the styptic pencil back in the cabinet, the Band-Aid ceremonially retained, the daughter asleep with the radio murmuring, the little leatherette box shut in its drawer under the handkerchiefs like a medal, and the strange soft tick of knowing she was one of the last who ever saw the before. She had this hour. They never got this hour. That's the last true thing tonight, so take it down with you. They taxed a skin, but the skin healed every nick it ever took. They got into the gaze, but not into this. Not into the hour after the light goes off, when there's no one to check and nothing to check for, when the leg under the blanket is just a leg, warm, animal, 50,000 years old, entirely off the market. The checking eye was never issued a night pass. It waits outside the door of sleep, and it cannot come in, and it never once, in 110 years of trying, learned to. Think of how much held perfectly still tonight. Underneath all that noise of decades. Wash water warming on a stove, 1889. Wash water warming on a ring, 1926, 1943. Warm water in your own pipes tonight. the same small kindness of heat on skin, running under the whole century like a stream under a road. Hemlines rose and fell. Wars took the stockings and gave them back. The verdicts changed their vocabulary every decade. And underneath it all, a woman at the end of the day washed and dried her hands and checked the sleeping children and lay down. The same as her mother, the same as her daughter, the same as you tonight, the same as all the nights, stretching back to the zinc tub and forward past everything the advertisers will ever think of next. And the hands. Notice the hands. One last time, because the whole story could have been told through nothing else. The farm wife's hands, white and pruned to the forearm, cracked at the knuckle where the lie found them, strong enough to wring a stocking dry along one twist. Her daughter's hands closing a magazine, then years later rinsing a borrowed razor with more care than she'd ever rinsed anything. The stenographer's hands, 90 words a minute of manufactured doubt, and never once, in 50 years of remembering quite clean of it, her word, not mine. The shopgirl's hands in white inspection gloves, stretching silk against the light. The kneeling girl's hand, wrist locked, drawing one dead straight line up a painted calf while a whistle changed the shifts. The mother's hand passing the styptic pencil, the daughter's hand holding a paper bag like documents. 5 generations of hands, doing what the day demanded and then, every night without exception, going still. They're all still now. Yours can be too. Let them lie open on the blanket, or curled, however they landed. They've carried enough for 1 century. Walk it backward with me once, gently, before we put the light out for good. Down the stairs of the years, one landing at a time, the way you'd walk down through a sleeping house. No need to hold on to anything. The facts will keep. You've already got them. This is just for the rhythm of descending. 1964, and a survey no one will read aloud tonight says 98, in a voice like a door clicking shut. Step down. 1957, and a pink bathroom holds the smell of aerosol foam and styptic, and a band-aid is worn to school like a ribbon, and everybody does. Step down. 1946, and 40,000 people stand in a Pittsburgh line under summer awnings for 13,000 pairs of the perfected leg, and the war is over, and the shop windows are lit again. Step down. 1943, and a kitchen chair holds still while a pencil travels ankle to hem, and a band tunes up across the mud, and 4,000 miles away the stockings open like white flowers in the dark and lower their cargo gently. Even the war is quiet from this far down the stairs. Step down. 1940, and Nylon Day empties the counters by lunch, and 64 million pairs walk out into the last spring anyone will get for a while. Step down. 1938, and 2 announcements share 1 year like strangers sharing a train seat. A law with the word cosmetic finely inside it, and a fibre spun from coal, air, and water. And neither knows the other is the second half of its own story. Step down. 1932, and a jar comes off the counters forever, and a company dies of arithmetic, and somewhere in Brooklyn a woman in wool socks is learning to walk again, slowly, hallway by hallway, and she will, mostly, and history owes her better than the footnote it gave her. Step softly past that landing. Step down. 1926, and a streetcar voice practices being bored, and a packet of blades crosses a drugstore counter into history, and a gold razor older than its owner hisses through lather in gaslight, and a licked finger stops a bright thread of blood at an ankle bone. Step down. 1922, and the fat grey catalogue that reaches every rutted road in the Republic quietly adds a page, and the arithmetic of a whole country changes its mind without a single speech. Step down. 1919, and 200 subscriptions die so that a doubt may live, and the doughboys come home with erasers in their kits, and a woman in Cleveland bolts a bathroom door and resigns from the 19th century in 6 careful strokes. Step down. 1915, and it's May, and a magazine lies open in a chair by a window in the evening light, and a drawn woman raises her arms forever, and the sentence underneath her, 3 gears, 9 seconds, 40 years, is just being read for the very first time. You can still hear the paper turn. Step down. 1889. The bottom of the stairs. A kitchen in Indiana, warm from the stove, smelling of lye and wet wool and October. The stockings drip on the line. The little girl is asleep under the table with her clothespin doll, and her mother lifts her. You can do this part. You've carried sleeping children, or been one, lifts her without waking her, the whole trusting weight of her, and carries her up to bed through a house with no bathroom, no magazines, no verdicts, no question anywhere in it. That's the before. You've stood in it now. Hardly anyone alive has. Let the door of that kitchen swing shut on its leather hinges, slow as breathing, and leave everything inside it exactly where it lay. And breathe like that house, if you want the trick of it. The old trick every one of these women knew without knowing it. The long day exhaled, the banked fire ticking, nothing left to tend till morning. In through the nose, slow, like the first pull of night air through a propped window. Out through the mouth, slower, like water finding the drain. Again, the century took a lot, but it never took this. The body's own knowledge of how to end a day. 50,000 years old, that knowledge. No one ever had to advertise it. So you're free now. Free enough. Warm enough. Tired enough. You have a bed and a blanket. And a body that carried you through this whole day without being asked twice. That's more than most of the century had. That's enough. Tomorrow there will be mirrors again, and eyes, and somebody selling something. Tomorrow there will be verdicts, new ones, printed overnight. Tomorrow the follow car pulls out at dawn, right on schedule, looking for skin. Tomorrow the whole bright racket opens its shutters like the shop on State Street. But that's tomorrow. Tomorrow isn't in this room. Nothing is in this room but you, and the dark and the quiet coming down like snow. Listen to the room a moment, the way this story has taught you to listen. Layers. Always layers. Sources under sources. The furnace or the radiator or the vent, whichever your decade issued you, keeping its low promise. The building settling one joint at a time, wood or brick or concrete, each with its own slow vocabulary of night sounds. A car somewhere, arriving or leaving, none of your business. Gone. The refrigerator down the hall cycling on and then off again, tending its little winter in the dark, asking nothing. Your own pulse in the pillow, if you lie just so, the oldest environmental sound there is, the one every woman in this story fell asleep to in the end, whatever else her year was doing outside the window. 1889 had the wind in the shelter belt and the stove ticking down through its heats. 1926 had the streetcars thinning, each one fainter, the intervals stretching like taffy until sleep won between two of them. 1943 had the plant humming 3 streets over, all night, every night, a sound so constant it became a kind of silence, and the girls slept inside it like shells inside the sea. You have whatever you have tonight, this exact weather of small sounds, and 50 years from now it will be somebody's lost century, somebody's deep past, as strange and warm and gone as gaslight. You're living in the good old days right now. In other words, someone's someday. And the only sensible thing to do with the good old days is exactly what you're doing. Lying still in the middle of them, warm, letting them hold you up. And there's nothing left to keep track of. That's the mercy of the last page of anything. All night I've asked you to hold dates, and you held them beautifully, and now you can set every one of them down. If 1915 slips away from you before your next breath, it doesn't matter. The microfilm holds it. If the names go, the King and the Cora, the Edna and the James, Pearl and the whole unnamed family of borrowed eyes, let them go. The shelf holds them. That's what shelves are for. Nothing in this story will be on the test because there is no test, because the eye that gave tests was never issued a night pass, and we are well past the door it waits outside of. Knowledge this old keeps itself. It has kept itself all these years in archive boxes and bound journals, and one leatherette case under the handkerchiefs. Patient as furniture, and it will keep till morning without your help, and long past morning, and long past you and me both, which is a comfortable thought at this hour, the way old stone walls are comfortable. Proof that things can simply stand. So the story stands. You can put it down. Centuries will pass. The bathrooms you know will change beyond recognition. The pink tile will go the way of the zinc tub. The razor on the porcelain will end up in a museum case beside the milady décolleté and the eyebrow pencil, and children will lean their foreheads on the glass and find them all equally strange, and a guide will explain to their frank disbelief that people once believed all of it, the way you tonight could hardly believe the wool stockings in the lake. The magazines will crumble in their archive boxes, May 1915 and all. The last register that ever rang for a verdict will ring for the last time, and nobody will notice which ring it was. But people will still warm water at the end of the day, still wash and dry their hands and check the sleeping children, still lie down in the dark beside the whole long story of everything they were told to be, and set it for a few hours entirely aside. Some things don't change. The dark hour past the reach of every campaign, that doesn't change. So let it come. Let sleep take you the way it took the farm wife when the last stocking was pinned to the line, completely and without opinion. Let the century's noise fade. The lodge bands, the shift whistles, the drugstore registers, the typewriters full of verdicts, the ceiling fans over the soda fountain, the swing band under the armory bunting. Let them all fade. Let the hemlines settle. They've climbed and fallen enough for one night. Let them hang still in the dark of every closet in the century, at every length at once, finally beyond argument. Let the water go still in the pipes. Let the checking eye close. It was only ever your own eye borrowed. Take it back now. Close it. Let your thoughts slow and soften and finally stop. The way a drawn seam stops at the hem. It's one job done. Dead straight. Good enough. Finished. You've earned this rest. Every day you've ever paid for ends in a night nobody can bill. Take it, and dream, if you dream at all, of something with no mirrors in it. A lake, maybe, at the end of summer, and wool stockings drying on a line and nobody watching at all the way to morning. Good night.